students, I'm Aanchal Sharma, your educator for paper 1. We have been discussing a lot of PYQs with the concepts related to it, and in today's video also we'll be discussing concepts and the PYQs related to our unit, that is environment, the people development and environment. So directly before jumping directly to the questions, we'll first look at some current affairs, or you can say these are the current affairs plus this also comes in the static portion. So all these things are asked in your environment topic. Let us discuss all of these first. So recently India submitted its long-term low emission development strategy, long-term low emission development strategy to which organization? To United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, that is UNFCCC. Now you should also know the full form of UNFCCC and when it was formed, which year it came into being, and they submitted their agendas, or you can say the long-term low emission development strategies, to UNFCCC at what in which organization, or you can say at which point of time? They did that in COP27 that was held in Egypt, right? So this can also be a question: when do you think and where do you think COP27 occurred? COP27 is the Conference of Parties 27 that happened in Egypt. There were few strategies and there were few key milestones that we discussed when we met for COP. Now, what is Conference of Parties? So these conference of parties are the parties that are held and there are so many countries who would sit together and then take decisions on the climatic conditions, right? So we have the Kyoto Protocol, Agenda 21, and all of these things are basically these are the different COPs that happen. So we have the Paris Agreement and the Kyoto Protocols. All of these things are important, and now we have COP27, and this happened in your Egypt, right? So there are few things and few milestones that they discuss. Now let us see. First of all, they talked about the hydrogen emission. So the national hydrogen emission launched in 2021 aims to make India now the one who will use green hydrogen. So what is green hydrogen should be known to you, because in 2022 this question was asked, that what is green hydrogen, or which type of hydrogen is actually being promoted to be used now. So we are now promoting that green hydrogen would be used. So there are different kinds of hydrogen. We discussed this in our class as well. Green hydrogen is the hydrogen that is made from water using the process of electrolysis. You should remember it. Then at least threefold increase in the nuclear capacity by 2032. This is also one agenda that they discuss. Then achieving an ethanol blending target of 20% by 2025. This was again an agenda that they discussed. So now blending of ethanol would be done. So what is blending? So ethanol can be mixed with gasoline, and then there is oxygen present in it. So what will happen? There will be full combustion, and when full combustion would be there, then less amount of carbon dioxide, less amount of harmful gases would be emitted, right? So this is why now blending of ethanol is being promoted. Then maximizing the use of electric vehicles, and then we are now promoting to use more and more public transport rather than private transportation system. Then increase in climate finance to be provided to all the developed nations is also one agenda that COP talked about. India also discussed that there would be zero emission. We discussed this in the previous video as well. So basically our agenda is that by 2070 there would be zero emission. If we will emit any amount of greenhouse gases, we will absorb it as well. So we'll have remedies to absorb it. Then we have some long-term strategy aims to look at the global temperature. So in our COP that we were discussing, that is the Paris Agreement, we discussed that the temperature should not exceed more than 2 degrees Celsius, and of course preferably it should be 1.5 degrees Celsius, right? Because it was going more than 3 degrees Celsius, so all of these agendas came into being. All of these things were discussed by the Environment Minister, that is Bhupendra Yadav, in COP27, and this was held in Egypt, right? So what is basically this long-term low emission development strategy? Now let us see. So the LEDs are basically qualitative in nature and are required emancipating and they are started to come into being from the 2015 Paris Agreement. So after this Paris Agreement, we started with basically discussing that there should be more and more strategies for the climatic conditions. So under the Paris Agreement, countries must explain how they will do and actually transmit their economies and would use those economies so that their nationally determined contribution, that means their NDC's targets, could be met. So in this Paris Agreement, they met together, all these countries, they decided that with each year we'll be sitting together and we'll be discussing. Right. So it started by just one meeting, and then they decided that no, we should meet each year to discuss about the climatic conditions, and this is how Conference of Parties started to be held. Right. When we will be discussing about all the agendas, we look towards the COP section also, but right now you should know that they meet at different places, and according to the name of the place, they started to give these COP their names. So when they met in Paris, this came to be known as the Paris Agreement. They decided that there would be some NDCs and we would have to use all these our resources, and then we have to fulfill our NDCs, that is the national determined contributions. So all these contributions, we would work together towards a larger objective, that is the climate change, and cutting the emission would be our basic agenda. Cutting emission by 45% by 2030 is what we want to achieve, and net zero emission about 2050. But we said that India would achieve this net zero emission by 2070. Right. So then the strategy is based on the 4 key considerations, and what all are these? And these are like the long-term strategies that we have. India has contributed little to the global warming. Its historic contribution to cumulative global greenhouse gases emission being minuscule, despite having a share of 15% in the world's population. So yes, we contribute a lot to the world's population, but we are emitting less amount of greenhouse gases, and we want to emit less amount of greenhouse gases. This is a long-term strategy. Then India has significant energy needs for development. We have energy needs, and we know that for the development we can use the renewable resources, and then we can make it all work out. Then India is committed to pursuing a low carbon strategy for the development, and it is actively pursuing all these things. We know that we should emit less and less amount of carbon, and low carbon strategies are being made. Also, India needs to build a climate resilience, and we know that we have to protect our country from the climatical conditions that we face. Now, what all are some features? The strategy will focus on rationalizing the utilization of the natural resources. This is the first point that we have to do. We have to use our natural resources in the most efficient manner. This will make our this will be making our country energy sufficient, and energy security would be promoted. The strategy will promote increase in the use of the biofuels, especially the ethanol blending in petrol. So as we discussed in the first slide, ethanol blending would be done. Ethanol blending is done when ethanol is mixed with gasoline, when there is always some oxygen in your ethanol, and then there is what is happening here, basically more amount of full complete combustion would happen, and less amount of harmful gases would be emitted. This is why the ethanol blending is being done and it is being promoted. The drive to increase the electric vehicle penetration is also increasing. We say that now we'll be promoting the electrical vehicles rather than using petroleum, the natural gas, and the increase in the use of the green hydrogen fuel. Again, we are talking about the green hydrogen. What is green hydrogen? This is the hydrogen that we derive from water using the process of electrolysis. You should know, and you should also know the different kinds of hydrogen that we discussed in the class. You should again go through your notes, and this will expected to be do what? This is expected that the low carbon would be emitted, and then the transport sector would develop as well. India aspires to maximize the use of electric vehicles now, ethanol blending to reach 20% by 2025, and a strong model shift from the public transportation to the public transportation from from the rigid transportation that we had. So from the private sector, from the private transportation system, we want to move towards the public transportation system for the passengers. So this is what we want to do. The industrial sector will continue to have the perspective of Atmanirbhar, that is make in India. We'll be producing our own goods. This is what we will be aiming at, and India will also focus at improving the energy efficiency by the performance that they have, and they will achieve by the performance index and also achieve and trade. So there is this scheme, the efficiency, that is the perform, achieve and trade scheme that they have, that is called as the PAT. They would be promoting that. So they would be promoting PAT, they would be promoting the national hydrogen mission that we started, and also increasing the electrification, enhancing material efficiency, and also recycling are the few ways that we want, so that we can reduce the emissions and make the agendas being met, right? So all the NDCs would be met if we follow all of these guidelines. Right, so now this is the first question that I have for you, and I hope you already understood. If not, I can quickly recap all these things. So first of all, in the first slide, I told you that the Conference of Party, that is the 27th Conference of Party, was held in Egypt. One fact that you should know. Also, there was this long-term low emission development strategy that India gave. And this is basically the strategy that everyone discussed together as well. And this was given to what? This was given to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, that is the UNFCCC. It is the UNFCCC only under which all these COP parties started to be met together, right? So started to held. So there are different conference of parties, like we have the Kyoto Protocol, we have Paris Agreement, and in Paris Agreement only basic agendas were being held for the climate change. And because they started to talk that yes, the temperature is increasing, and it is increasing to about 3 degrees Celsius or maybe more. So we should make it to 2 degrees Celsius or less than 2 degrees, that is 1.5. That is the ideal that we want. And to have this, to do all these things, to meet this target, basically each country came together, and the heart of the Paris Agreement was the NDCs, that is the nationally determined contributions, that is the NDCs. These are the targets that each country placed, that we'll be doing all these things so that the Paris Agreement agendas could be met, right? So this is what they do. There were other objectives that we discussed, and all these objectives, when we will be following that, then only the temperature would be in a proper stable manner. So what all are the few things that we'll be doing? Of course, there would be rationalization, proper utilization of our natural resources, because we know that we need energy and the energy security. Then there should be increase in the use of biofuels, then ethanol blending, increase in electrical vehicle penetration. Also, we'll switch to public transport now. There would be usage of the green hydrogen fuel, and then at the end we also discussed that about 20% of the fuel would be mixed with ethanol by 2025, and then we'll be using more of electric vehicles, right? So then we also discussed that Make in India would be promoted. Then we had the performance, achieve and trade scheme that would be promoted, national hydrogen mission, and increasing electrification, also enhancing the efficiency of the materials we would be using, right? So now I hope you must have written all the points. Now let us start with the questions. So this is the first question, and in today's class, basically this class is centered around the Millennium Development Goals. Today we'll be discussing the Millennium Development Goals. So this is the first question. There are 3 statements given to you. First is related to the Millennium Development, then Sustainable Development Goals, again related to the Sustainable Development Goals. So in these statements, you should know when these when these Millennium Development Goals started, when it ended, when Sustainable Development Goals started, and when will they end, right? So let me read to you the first statement. A, the Millennium Development Goals were to be achieved by 2015. The Sustainable Development Goals will guide the United Nations Development Program policy till or until 2035. Then there is Sustainable Development Goals came into effect in January 2016. So the right answer is B, that is A and C are the correct option, while B is not the correct statement. Why? Because you have to achieve it by 2030 first of all, and not by 2035. Rest, the two statements are correct, because the Millennium Development Goals are to be achieved or were to be achieved by 2015. That is, we have already crossed this bar, and then the Sustainable Development Goals came into effect in 2016. Now let us read more about all these statements. So the Sustainable Development Goals, what do you actually mean by sustainable development first? So sustainable development is using the resources in such a manner that you are saving it for the future generation. So you are using the resources in the most efficient manner so that you are not compromising the needs of the future generation to come. So sustainable development refers to the development that meets the need of the present without compromising the ability of the future generation to meet their own needs, right? So the present generation are satisfied, and the coming generation is also satisfied. Now the statement 1, in September, that is 2000, the world leaders came together at the United Nations headquarters, which is in New York. Another question, this is also being asked, to adopt what? To adopt the United Nations Millennium Declaration. The UN members, there were a series of about, some members came together and they decided that there would be a series of 8 time-bound targets that will have a deadline of 2015. So they met together and they decided that there would be time-bound goals that we want to achieve. Till when? There are 8 goals we want to achieve till 2015. So 8 goals that are there and we have to achieve till 2015. These would be called as the Millennium Development Goals. In short form, we call them as MDGs. So these 8 MDG goals include the eradication of extreme poverty and hunger, achieving universal primary education, promoting gender equality, empowering women, reducing child mortality, improving maternal health, combating HIV/AIDS, malaria and other diseases, ensuring environmental sustainability, and developing a global partnership for development. So these are the 8 rules or the 8 goals that we have. These are the goals that we want to achieve till 2015. Hence, the first statement is the correct statement. Then comes the next statement. In September 15, the General Assembly of the United Nations adopted the 2030 agenda, and this 2030 agenda that came into force in 2015. So in 2015 the Millennium Development Goals ended, and we know that some of them were achieved, few things were achieved but few were not. So we wanted to extend it. So on those lines only we started to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. So in September 2015 the General Assembly of the United Nations adopted the 2030 agenda for the sustainable development. So the members took a pledge that there would be a commitment towards a 17 goal structure. So there is a bold and transformative structures called as the Sustainable Development Goals, with not only these 17 goals but 169 targets are also intended to ensure that all human beings can fulfill their potential in dignity and in equality and in healthy environment. So we have 169 targets and we have 17 goals. Now this is also a PYQ. They have asked all these simple questions also. How many MDGs are there? How many SDGs are there? They can also ask all these things. Now they are going one step further, as I told you. So these 169 targets and these 17 goals all should be clear to you. Of course, humanly it is impossible to remember 169 targets, but I would try to discuss few important targets in the upcoming classes. And we'll be discussing targets related to the Millennium Development Goals as well. So there are 17 SDGs, 169 targets, and this comes under the agenda 2030 agenda for sustainable development that was adopted by 193 member states at the Union General Assembly, which came into effect when? It came into effect on 1st January 2016, right? So 2016. So 1st January 2016, we came up with the Sustainable Development Goals. The SDGs were built upon the foundation of the Millennium Development Goals. Hence, we know that these statements are correct. B becomes incorrect and C is correct. Now, hence we see that the Millennium Development Goals were achieved by 2015 and the Sustainable Development Goals came into effect in 2016. So, the MDGs are drawn from the action and the targets that contain in the Millennium Declaration that are adopted by 189 nations and signed by 147 heads of the state and the government during the Millennium